The religion of tilling or the religion of not tilling. Seems like there's boundaries. That either you're a tillage person or you're a no-till. And it's almost like we're not supposed to like the other person. Aren't we all in the fraternity of farming? Aren't we all supposed to work together to help each other, to neighbor, to guide, to possibly mentor? I personally am not a fan of no-till. And I said, and it isn't just an opinion, it comes from fact. You probably didn't know this, but my dad and I tried no-till on 640 acres for 13 to 15 years. Now there's a catch. It was CRP. The reason my dad wanted to put it into CRP is because our neighbors were chemically farming and we were starting to get saline and sodic spots, dead white spots in our field. My dad says, we've got good neighbors, but the way they're farming is killing our soil. And what I mean by that is ground are low spots, and we're fairly flat, but the low spots on our ground, at that time it was just minimum till. They were turning white and dying. And what we noticed is where the ground was dead, we used an EC meter. And we found out that that electricity in the lowest part of the dead area was 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. And as we started moving to the edge, we started seeing some foxtail, some wild barley, some tickle grass, which is one of the highest salt-loving plants that grow. And we were about 1.7, maybe 1.5. Go a little bit further away from the dead spot, and now we get kochia growing. We're probably a 1.0, 1.2. The electricity of that area was dictating what was growing. Here's my point. On 640 acres, we probably had 30 acres of dead ground. Dead ground meaning they planted it every year, they fertilized it every year, they sprayed it every year, but it grew nothing. So he enrolled it into the CRP program, and we planted the seed, and we were off to the races. We got paid to do nothing. Well, at the end of 10 years, we had the option to renew that for another 3 to 5 years. Dad and I talked, and he says, we've still got some weeds, we've still got some thistles. I say we leave it in and give it a little bit more of a rest. And I said, hey, it's your ground, Pop. I'm just here to help you and support you. So we left it in another 3 to 5 years. At the end of the term, 13 to 15 years of it doing nothing. Now keep in mind, every third year, the hay got removed. There were no chemicals sprayed on this ground for 13 years. There was no fertilizer spread on this ground for 13 years, and there was only crop removed every 3 years. So we were getting to the end of the 13 and 15 years of the CRP, and I asked Dad, what do we want to do with this ground? And he says, well, we can't keep it in CRP forever. We got to take it out. And I said, okay. I said, what's your plan? He says, well, as he looks at me and he says, your granddad and I bought and paid for this ground without all this high-tech crap. If we can buy it and pay for it without it, it should be maintained without it. And as I'm nodding yes and saying yes, sir, my head's thinking, nobody up here wants to farm organically. And I don't have any equipment, and I really wasn't in the mental or the physical spot to start farming, but I did. And as that came out of CRP, I started checking some numbers. Now keep in mind, this ground had been left untouched for 13 years, but we had compaction. We had compaction at 1.5 inches. We had compaction at 3 inches. And to give you definitive numbers, we were 300 psi at 1.5 inches from the surface. We were at 400 psi at 3 inches. And we were 500 psi of compaction at 6 inches. 15 years of no-till. So it's like, oh boy, we've got some compaction problems. It's like, what do we do? So it's like, well, before I do anything, I want to see what kind of plants are growing. So I got out my trusty refractometer and I was curious to see what the sugar content of the grass was and the sugar content of the alfalfa/clover that had grown in there. Now, during the time that we had clover and alfalfa in the CRP, we originally started off with a 30% stand of alfalfa. And at the end, I asked my neighbors, I said, hey fellas, I said, take a look. What percent of the alfalfa do you think is still in that stand? And they'd look at it, and they looked at me, and they're like, 2 to 3%. They said, well, you started with 30, didn't you? I said, yeah. I said, have you guys ever seen alfalfa thicken back up without the addition of seed? Well, they couldn't wait to laugh as they got back in their pickups and left the yard. And I said, hey, fellas, I said, before you leave, I said, I think I can thicken that up without adding a seed. And they're still giggling as they're driving away, giving me the wave like, yeah, good luck. So I went to check some more numbers, and I went out with my high-dollar garlic press and high-dollar refractometer, and I squeezed some grass. And the grass that I squeezed was a Wahi intermediate wheatgrass, a cool season grass that was the predominant grass on these quarters. And when I squeezed this grass, it was about this time of the year, first part of June. It was just getting ready to be cut for hay. So what I did is I looked at the grass, I measured halfway up, took a chunk out, put it in my garlic press, and squeezed the juice. Good grass should be double digits, 10% sugar, 11% sugar. Percent or brix, they're interchangeable terms, B-R-I-X, the measurement of sugar that's in the blood or the sap of the plant. So I squeezed the grass and I took a look, and it's like, oh boy, this ground has rested for 13 years plus. And grass that should be 13, 14, 15 was 3. It's like, well, I still got 2, maybe 3% alfalfa. I'm going to go check that. I squeezed the sugar out of the alfalfa. Took a look, it's like, oh, this has got to be a whole lot better. And by the way, this alfalfa was just starting to bud. It was a nice, warm, sunny day, and that makes a difference, and it was 11 o'clock in the morning. The time of the day that you take the sugar reading will determine the level of what you see in the plant. So I squeezed the alfalfa. I didn't just squeeze the leaves. I measured halfway up. I took stem and leaf. Because when you're cutting or baling or feeding grass or alfalfa hay, you feed it all. So I squeezed it and I took a look. It's like, oh, 4 bricks. Good alfalfa, just like good grass, just like any food crop, should be 10 bricks or more. So I know I've got compaction. I know I've got low sugar. What's my next move? This has been no-till. No chemicals, no traffic, no crop removal, nothing. What's my next move? It's like, well, I know that I have to put the top 5 things down that a food crop needs, whether it's food for feed for an animal or food for humans. They all want the same thing. I got to get available calcium and phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. But the first thing I need to do is make sure the soil can breathe. We started looking around and we found a piece of equipment called an airway. I'm not promoting them and I'm not sponsored by them. There's other pieces of equipment out there. There was a dealership that was close to us and they were very helpful. Fairly expensive piece of equipment. If you're not familiar with vertical tillage, it's almost like aerating a golf course, only on a big scale. It would poke a slot down into the soil 7 inches deep every 7 inches. And when I bought this piece of equipment, they said this is a high-speed tool, 8, 10, 12 miles an hour. So I'm thinking, oh, this is wonderful. So they said you need about 20 horsepower per foot. So I got a 25-footer, hooked it up, and I'm making my first pass out in the field, and I'm getting my AB line set. And I get that set, and I start grabbing gears. And boy, this is going to be fun. It's smooth. This is CRP. It hasn't been touched for 13 years. And I get everything rolling, and I'm doing about 9.5 miles an hour, and I look back, and I see those tines are going in 1.5 inches. They're not making it past the first compaction layer. So it's like, oh, drop a gear, drop a gear, drop a gear, drop a gear. I was over 9, I'm now down to 6. And now I'm in about 2.5 inches. I'm not to the 3-inch hard pan with that. Drop a gear, drop a gear, drop a gear. By the time I got full penetration with those 7-inch tines, I was doing 3.7 miles an hour. It's like, oh, at the time I wasn't that old, but it's just like, I might as well get comfortable. Get a couch in this cab, get a cooler, pack a lunch, because it's going to be a long, long time. Here's my point. I ran across that in the fall of the year. Just opened it up. And when we talk about tillage, we talk about intelligent tillage. This, in my mind, was intelligent tillage. This was very low disturbance. All it did was poked slots into the soil. So I did that the first fall. I did it the second fall. I did it the third fall. We'll speed this whole story up. 3 years of putting holes in the soil, giving the calcium, phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen and goodies to the soil. I went back and checked the grass at 11 o'clock on the first part of June in the third year, and I measured halfway up. I squeezed it with my high-dollar garlic press, and what was 3 bricks was now 13. Yes, 1, 3, 13 bricks, double digits. I had gained 10 bricks of sugar in 3 years. It's like, hey, now we're talking. So I clean it off, the refractometer, check the alfalfa. What was 4 bricks 3 years ago was now 16, 17, 18 bricks of sugar. The leaves were big, fat, and round, and now I was ready to grow food. The difference between food. When we first checked that hay, after 13 years of no-till, we cut, raked, and baled it. I sent it in to get sampled. And if you're familiar with grass quality, relative feed quality, you'll know that 100 to 110 is kind of low-ball hay. 120 to 130 is pretty average. 130 to 140, fairly respectable grass hay. And from the experts that I was talking to, they said, you get over 150, you make your own rules. Knowing we only had 3 bricks of sugar in the grass, I wasn't expecting much. I sampled it anyway. I sent it off for a test. The relative feed quality came back anywhere from 88 to 102. Politely speaking, it was crap. Basically ditch hay. Who am I going to give this to try to get rid of it, because I have no livestock? Jumping forward 2 years after intelligent aeration and the addition of calcium, phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, the dairy up on the hill wanted to chop this grass hay. And the reason he wanted to chop it, because he was one of the neighbors that I asked 3 years prior. It's like, how much alfalfa? What percent alfalfa is in this stand? And he said 2 to 3. The same guy says, you know, he goes, you got almost 30% alfalfa out there. He goes, where did it come from? It's like, create the environment and good things will show up. And so while we're talking, he goes, hey, he says, what are you going to do with this grass hay? He says, which is almost now alfalfa grass hay. And it's like, well, I said, let's get it tested and see if it's worth anything to you in the dairy, because the first couple of years it was horrible hay. He gets the hay test back. He goes, I don't even want to show you the test. And I said, because you're being polite, or possibly that the test is good and this grass hay is now worth something. He slides his sheet over to me. He goes, 159 relative feed quality? He says they tested it twice because they didn't believe it. The numbers on this grass had absolutely changed in 3 years. Now, I didn't moldboard plow it. I didn't disc it. I didn't do anything other than poke some holes. Intelligent tillage. Because if something can't breathe, nothing's going to work. Everything good in this life has to have air. So even though that ground was untouched, we spread no chemicals over this for 13 years. We physically chopped it with a 20-foot stock chopper, any weeds that came in. They would not allow us to run a sprayer across to spray nutrition, but we could have run that same sprayer across with chemical. Didn't understand that, but they were paying us to leave it set aside, so they got to make the rules. Point being is, I have experience with no-till. I noticed what just the small amount of intelligent tillage, and what I mean by that is seeing what your air is. And it doesn't matter if you're no-till, full-till, minimum till, we're all fraternal brothers of farming. We need to work together. So if you're a no-tiller, I'm not against you. I'm just saying it didn't work for me. If you can make it work where you don't have compaction, hey, we will do anything we can to give you information to make your program or your process more successful. After 3 years of poking holes in this ground and adding nutrients to it, you no-tillers, you're probably going to want to cover your ears now, because we had a hard pan just below what we could reach with the vertical tillage. So we came out with a moldboard plow, and we plowed under green manure about 2 feet tall. We sprayed it with all the nutrients, we flipped that down, and we sprayed it on top again. I'm 3rd generation on our farm, which is now our research farm. I should be more specific. It's now our organic research farm. We do tillage because we have weeds. We have to do tillage because we can't use chemicals. Looking at the future of farming, farmers, we're all in this together. This story brings back a lot of memories from my dad. And when I was a junior in high school, my dad says, what do you want to do when you get out of high school? I said, well, I want to come back and farm. He goes, you're going to go learn something. You're going to go learn another trade. He says, and once you get a degree, then you can come back. He says, farming's tough. And I said, anybody that's farming, you'll know what I mean. Farmers buy everything retail. Farmers sell everything wholesale. They don't get to set their market price, and weather dictates the crop you get. He said, farming's an awful tough life. He says, learn something else and come back. I am back on the farm, and I'm sharing the same pain that all of us share together. Whether you're no-tilling, full tillage, or anything between, please take a breath, and rather than stabbing the guy that isn't doing what you're doing, realize he is a fraternal farmer. He's part of our group. We don't drive the same pickups, we don't drive the same tractors, we don't have the same sense of humor. We have different farming practices. He says, We don't need to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But let's work together, because he probably knows stuff that'll help you, and I know you know something that'll help him. If you're old enough to remember, back in 1978, there was a radio commentator by the name of Paul Harvey. And he spoke in 1978 to the future farmers of America. And he gave something that I think sums everything up. So God made the farmer. We're all farmers. We're in the fraternity of farming. Let's extend a hand of friendship despite what their practices are. Despite what they do when they get up, they're still trying to grow something just like we are. There's enough opposition out there for all of us. Let's help each other, because we are farmers. And God did create all of us. I hope this information has been helpful. I'm Glen with Soil Works. Look forward to talking to you.